Hello. I should probably put my mic into place. Something like so. Seems like we have sound. Topic of today, Bob, is I was going to talk about muting and keeping things quiet as you play. I was going back listening to some old recordings I've made and some old videos, and I want to put together like a self critique for the podcast. And I was looking for material, and one of my critiques was, "Oh my God, Brad, you're making so much noise as you play." So I thought we could talk about how to avoid that and keep it quiet. Good morning, Harold. Thanks for tuning in. So I guess this is one of those boring topics. Everybody's gonna like leave the room as soon as they hear what I'm talking about, but it's one of those things that's it really helps with the impression you put across, but it doesn't you don't get any glory. It's not like playing fast or playing nice sounding chords. It's just like something you don't notice until it changes on you. But it's important, and I think I talk about important things. Everybody who follows me knows that. Gonna kick around here for a couple more minutes. Get started at 10 o'clock. Feel free to chime in where you're tuning in from. Say hi. I'm getting started here in Hawaii. It's a beautiful day. Very few clouds in the sky. Gonna be doing lots of projects. I have a big to-do list for the rest of the week. Got a podcast episode to make. Got to schedule emails for the course launch. The course is launching this weekend, the 6th course. Big thanks to Harold for going through it and troubleshooting and double checking my work. Um, yeah, it's turning out pretty cool. I just got to get the emails written and make sure all the ducks are in a row. Alistair, good morning, sir. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I got some fence to build. I'm working on my pig fence, trying to keep piggies out of my property so I can plant some trees and some food. I'm getting ready to close in like a corner that they traverse the neighborhood through. So it's going to change the pig highway. See where the pigs start going once that's all patched up. That'll be interesting. And got videos to shoot. Lots of things to do. No shortage of projects. Oh my, being self-employed is a blessing and a curse. Good morning, Fred. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for I believe we emailed just this morning, last night. Thanks for being in touch, for supporting the cause. And it's 10 o'clock. All right, so as I said when we just first came on, I was going back through some old recordings and videos of myself because I'm putting together a podcast episode. I need a quick subject for this Saturday, and I figured, well, why not critique some of my old playing and talk about the different ways that it could be improved and it could be better. I thought that might be insightful and interesting for me and for people listening, and it would be an excuse to like listen to musical examples, which I don't do enough of on the podcast. But what I heard was I was playing a lot of extra fluff, extra filler stuff that was like kind of unintentional, but it was meant to fill the gaps, but it didn't sound very clean. And so I thought I would talk about muting and keeping things quiet because I don't believe we've really talked about that too much yet on the live stream. All right, so you can play a note and things happen around it, right? Even if you just were to play a very simple picking line, by starting a vibration on the instrument, you are going to set the other strings ringing to a certain amount. If I was to play, you probably can't hear this on C, but if you pick up your ukulele and it's in tune, which this is mostly in tune, and you play a C note, and then you stop playing the note, there's still noise happening on the instrument. And if you can't hear it across the YouTube, then try it on your own ukulele. Play C on the third fret of the A string, and then stop it. And there's going to be sympathetic ringing that continues happening even after you stop the note. And so that is a very low level example of noise and playing, just a kind of a side effect of playing single notes. And you could play them as clean as you please, but if you've got open strings, there's going to be that sympathetic ringing. And a lot of times it's kind of a nice effect. You don't really notice it a whole lot on ukulele because it's really quiet. But I've heard like electric guitar player guys talk about it, where if you've got some of the strings ringing and they're ringing sympathetically with what you're playing, it almost sounds kind of like a little bit of a reverb in the background, which is kind of a cool effect. But what you can do once, if you don't want that sound, like that really gets it going. If you play back and forth from E on the 7th fret to C on the 3rd fret, because the sympathetic ringing really happens most when you play the note of a nearby open string. So if I'm playing C, because this note is C, I'm setting the open C string ringing. If I play the E, I'm setting the open E string ringing. And so if I go back and forth between them, I'm kind of like ramping up the amount of ringing happening on two strings. So you're kind of hearing a little bit more. So if I start from completely quiet, it's almost like a harmonic that you're getting because the string is trying to ring at that same frequency of the note you're playing. And so it's beautiful. If I was to play like some sort of like majestic sort of melody line, having those ringing notes can be really beautiful. But if you're trying to play as crystal clear, clean as possible, you probably don't want that sympathetic ringing to happen. In which case, you're going to approach fretting the notes in kind of a different way, because what you're going to try and do is only play that single note. So I could play the same thing and intentionally mute the other strings, and it's going to be kind of a smaller, tighter sound because there's not that sympathy happening, right? So that's an interesting thing to begin thinking about as a player, because there's lots of ways to achieve it and lots of ways to kind of make it happen. And so usually it's left hand and right hand. And so what the left hand can do is the left hand can mute around the string. So basically what's happening is all the other strings are muted even as you're playing your melody note, right? Those three strings are completely cut off. And all I'm hearing is that one C, right? And this is the kind of thing, if you're not able to hear the sympathetic ringing, try it on your own ukulele, because it's really usually pretty obvious. I have yet to run across an instrument that's like completely dead and doesn't do this. So try it yourself and see if you can hear the difference between just playing without trying to mute, and then try muting with your left hand. Try and add some fingers onto the top three strings so that they're muted, and then do the same thing. It's much more closed, much more focused of a sound, which can be good. It can be bad, but it's a good thing to know about as you're playing. All right. So this is a super detail oriented approach. Usually you're not going to worry about the sympathetic ringing. And what I'm kind of more thinking about and worrying about when I critique my own playing, going back and listening to what I've played before, I'm like, oh, that sounds kind of sloppy. I'm playing a lot of filler extra stuff that's not super well executed. It's because this hand's just kind of going, right? Right. This hand's just like making stuff up. And what it has to do, I talk about the sympathy thing because it really, it's part of the same idea, but I'm exaggerating it a lot more when this hand just kind of dances on its own. And it's going to be hard for me to kind of explain this because I've gotten a lot better and more focused and intentional when I play. But going back and listening to that, what I was doing, like if I'm playing, say I'm playing like a super simple melody in C over a C chord, and I'm gonna kind of have like a C chord ringing sound happening as I play. Like if I was to play something where I'm like brushing on all the strings, depending on the context, that can be that can be too much. Like it would be a lot cleaner if I just played if I played it right. Because if you were playing like in a group, maybe you want your lead part to really cut through and be like super obvious because the rest of the group is playing supporting harmony. Whereas if you play it solo, like that might be a little bit lost if you've got another ukulele player who's in the background playing some sort of rhythm, because they're already playing those notes and you're going to get a little bit more buried. But if you really differentiate what you're playing by only playing one thing, you can kind of aim yourself a little bit tighter and be more precise with your delivery. So that's something to think about, is especially for people who are getting into fingerstyle playing. A lot of what fingerstyle playing is holding the chord you're playing over. So in this case, if I was playing a melody over C and my harmony was C, we've talked about this a lot in different arrangement styles. You can go back and watch some past videos if you're not sure about that. But a lot of times what you do is you play the melody, but everything around the melody is kind of improvised. You just create some sort of picking pattern or strum thing to go around it. And this is good, this is necessary, but a lot of times what happens is it's kind of everything besides the melody is sort of like unintentional. So like what what I could think about if I was playing that melody is what are like the key notes, what could I do to tighten it up? So instead of just kind of being like, where it's kind of like blah 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 and everything's just happening all at once, I could like try and focus it down by maybe just pinching on the C and the A strings. I've still got a harmony, but now it's a lot more focused when I play those notes. Even if I was to do that, to go back to kind of the piano style thing we talked about a few lessons ago, if I was to pinch like the three bottom strings, even that's a lot tighter. As opposed to where you're just kind of like I don't want to bag on the style because I know it is extremely viable and the people who do it well can really pull it off. I don't feel like I'm super one of those people. It ends up being kind of muddy for me, but maybe that's just practice. But like Kimo Hussey's style, fabulous, beautiful way of playing the ukulele. But a lot of folks who try and pick it up and get into it, it ends up creating a lot of just kind of like unintentional fluff happening around the melody if you're not at a place where you can practice that precisely. So I think it helps to have a little bit more of a focus as you jump into a style like that. And basically what Kimo's style is you're playing kind of on the bottom strings, you're playing like up brushes, and then for your harmonies you're playing down brushes. And I'm totally not, this is not how I play. I mean, I've certainly borrowed ideas and styles from him over the years, but it's not like my main wheelhouse. But it kind of goes hand in hand with everything. You can always have a little piece of that here and a little piece of that there. It all is related. But especially I notice when I'm just playing with a brush thing, it tends to get a little bit sloppy. So that's where, if you're doing the brush thing, try and like identify what strings you want to play at a certain point in time. Like if I know that if I pinch precisely on the three bottom strings, well, how can you do that with your brush instead of just like dibbling your finger on the strings. You can be a little bit, instead of like just kind of doing everything all at once. Right? That would be kind of like what I would think of as kind of the messy version. But then if you were to be a little more intentional and only try and get those 3 bottom strings, and the execution's not very good on my part because this is not the kind of style I play, but hopefully I'm kind of giving you some ideas and things to think about. Right? And that would be kind of the version with all the sympathetic ringing you can get, because you're just letting everything ring all the time. And that can be cool, but a lot of times where the sophistication in playing comes from is actually at the end of the note. And I can't remember if we've talked about this a whole lot or not in past live streams. I don't recall. But if you were to play, it's very different from where you're controlling the duration of the note by lifting your finger off and terminating the ringing of the sound. Right? If I was to playing my melody there, I could play it more staccato. Like pop the first note, and it completely changes the feel of the whole little line. So first, that would be legato, where I play everything kind of as long as it'll last. And here's where I pop the first note. It kind of just bounces the whole thing in a different direction. So to do that, all you're going to do is you lift off the string, lift off the fret. Sorry, don't lift off the string. You lift off the fret so that your finger, when it lifts off the fret, it still is in contact with the string. So you go from a ringing note to lifting to what would sound like a mute if you were to pick it. But you're just lifting to that. So you can stop the note. You can hear all the sympathy, or I can hear all the sympathetic notes ringing just by playing that little bit. But if you do that little pop, instead of playing, well, like if I was to play that, it would be quarter notes, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. That kind of a thing. I could play like eighth notes. And expressive wise, it becomes different. It's not the same passage as if you were to just let everything ring the entire length of time. So that's another consideration too, is as you're playing, because if you're playing like with a just kind of whatever messy style, maybe the messiness isn't from the harmony sympathetic ringing that you're playing just by kind of like pinching and striking the strings at random. Maybe it's from the melody drifting over where it's supposed to rhythmically sit, in which case, like for instance, we all know this, but if I was to play it staccato, it's not really the same song, because the presentation has changed dramatically just by cutting off the notes and making them a lot shorter. Trying to think of an example of like something staccato that could be turned legato and completely changed. Okay, so this is kind of a dumb one, but if you were to play like Happy Birthday, that first little bit, happy birthday, you could very easily staccato that and it would sound natural. It's just one of those songs that the feel of the song could be chopped up a lot more, and you could practice muting with that and it would sound more natural than making Twinkle Twinkle Little Star staccato. And And when you're playing open strings, you can just drop your fingers lightly onto the strings to stop them. That's usually how, instead, because you need to be fretting a note to be able to lift the finger to a lift mute, right? So if I'm playing open strings, I don't have a finger on the fret to lift up. So what I have to do is I just lightly drop my fingers onto the strings to silence them. Just be sure you're not pushing enough so that you're hammering on in weird places, because then you're creating more noise. So try that with the happy birthday. If you're, I believe, if you're in the key of F, if you were to play on the open C string to the second fret, and then first fret E string to open. So try and play it legato, where everything rings as long out as possible. And then if you were to play it staccato, you would make everything as short as possible, but the beginning point of the note would remain the same. You're not playing it faster. Staccato doesn't mean you're playing it faster. It means that instead of letting the note ring from here to here, now the note is ringing from here to here. But the next note is still at that end point, right? The next note starts in the same place. So legato and staccato, same kind of cadence. It's just that one is very clipped. So if you practice the difference between these and being able to stop things intentionally, you might not necessarily play an entire song staccato that you once played legato. That's not necessarily the point. But the point is, that was my melody. The point is that you can change the feel of something dramatically, even by just stopping one note a little bit sooner. Whereas if I let it ring, it's a different expression, and having those different expressions is really super critical for being able to paint with all the colors. If you're not able to control where the notes end as well as where they begin, then you're not getting all the colors. You're painting in black and white. Okay, so that's one style of muting. There's lots of different styles of muting. There's keeping things quiet muting, which is more like dampening. I think of it like dampening. And then there's lift muting, or hand drop muting, which is basically achieving the same thing. That all happens with the left hand. If I was to move to the right hand and look at what happens, the right hand usually doesn't execute this as well as the left hand, but it's easier usually to make the motions and to make the action happen with your right hand. That's why if you're playing something, a lot of times when you see people start muting, they start with dropping their hand onto the strings, because it's a more tangible, cause and effect kind of motion, as opposed to lifting your finger. You can barely even see that I'm doing anything when I do that. But if I do this, it's a little bit more accessible for beginner and newer players. More on that in a minute. We got a question from Higgs. Are there ever times where you would play a muted string and a legato simultaneously? I'm sure there are. That sounds like it would be, well, because you could play, your legato note could be like one of the open strings. Yeah, so if your legato note was on the open string and you were playing my C string is continuing to ring, but the fretted C note is being lifted up, so it's being cut short. And basically that would be kind of like a let ring situation. You see that written on tabs sometimes, but yeah, basically you're letting what can be left to ring, you're letting it ring, and where you have to change and you have to move your fingers, you would be changing to different notes. But as far as playing, like, I like when you first asked the question, I was thinking like, boy, a double stop where you were to like to actually think about a pair of notes and have one express one way and one express another. That's like a whole nother level of complexity that has is not something I've really spent time doing, but I'm sure there could be some really cool results. And it makes sense that as a virtuoso player, you would want to be able to do that. I don't think I'm that person, Ryan. Yeah, I haven't really thought about it because usually ukulele is so like one train of thought. Um, like if you everybody who's watching, if you go look up a guy called Charlie Hunter, um, he's the kind of guy where that sort of mindset where you have like a staccato thing and a legato thing happening at the same time. That's where I would expect to see that train of thought a little bit more because he's got a like an extended guitar with like 8 strings or 7 strings or something, but he's got like basically a bass on the low end, like a bass guitar low end, and on the high end it's a normal guitar, and he plays the whole thing. He plays both parts. He'll play like a walking bass line and jazz comping on top of it. It's ridiculous. Like the guy must practice nonstop. He must have no life whatsoever. But it's really interesting to see that expressed on the same instrument. Of like, wow, here we've got basically one person playing 2 different parts in 2 different styles on the same instrument, and that's where I think Higgs, your question computes a little bit more in my brain. For ukulele, unless you're James Hill doing Billie Jean or whatever, a lot of times it's like, well, here's my line, and the notes work together. It's like everything happens simultaneously on the instrument. And I think that's probably the next one of the next levels of development on the instrument as a musical instrument and as a mode of expression is going to be like that, those counterparts happening in the same place on the same instrument, but we're not there. We're still like doing the lead line kinds of things. But that's a super good question. Thanks for asking that. Back to the right hand. The right hand is the visible hand when it comes to muting and dampening. So you can try this yourself if you're playing like an open C chord. Your left hand could theoretically mute the whole thing. And a good player will just mute with the left hand with the C, because you can lift up on the ring finger that's holding the 3rd fret, and you can drop a finger onto the excess string, so you end up with everything muted. Right? It's a little bit clunky because you're kind of shifting, you're going down and up at the same time, which is a little bit confusing. But I could do the same thing with my right hand. I kind of have to alter my playing style a little bit to drop my hand onto the strings, but that would be probably the easier version of the drop mute and or the lift mute would be just to take your right hand and cover up the strings. So that's something that I see quite often is people get into the muting game with their right hand, and it's a great place to start. And a lot of times, even once you graduate to playing mutes more with your left hand, the right hand is still kind of like it's a backup. Like a lot of times when I'm playing, like if I was to play like a reggae chank or something, I'm doing a lift mute here on my left hand, but there's almost like I'm almost like keeping time with my right hand by dropping it onto the strings and getting a little bit of a chick sound as I move onto the strings. And that's partially to ensure that there's a mute happening there, but also to kind of help keep time. That kind of a thing where by doing both, you're kind of like safety netting yourself and making sure that you're getting a mute happening. That's one way to think about it. Doing mutes with the right hand is a little bit limited because it kind of takes you out of, it pushes in the clutch of your hand engine, right? If your hand is picking and strumming and doing all the things, in order to mute with the right hand, you have to disengage the warp drive of your hand making sounds on the strings, which is why a lot of times I think the superior way to mute is with the left hand eventually, if you can get to that point. But what the right hand does do probably better than the left hand is dampening, where you're keeping things quiet as you're picking. And this doesn't really apply to strumming, because with strumming you're intentionally strumming all the strings at once. You're trying to sound everything. But if I'm playing a lead, if I don't want the sympathetic sounds going, or if I'm playing a lead across several strings, let's do something like that, where I'm moving across, switching strings as I go. I'm creating like string noise, and just from all my practice, I've kind of worked out the kinks of basic lead playing, so it's hard for me to recreate this. But if you were to listen to a more beginning player play a lead like that, a lot of times as they move their hand, they're not going to completely release the string in a clean way. So there's going to be like mini pull-offs happening as they change strings. And so, but I always tell people who are experiencing this, and this is where you're basically, you're not intentionally pulling off by pulling downwards on the string, but just by lifting your finger up, you're going from holding the fret to lifting off the finger. And that just by nature creates a little bit of a pull-off sound. And the way to combat this is you pluck the note, and then when you lift off, you hit your finger so that it ends in a mute. Right? So if I was to play from the note, and then when I lift, it's going to sound like this. I'm not playing it again, obviously, but when I lift, I'm not leaving the string yet. And then once the vibration of the string is dampened by the flesh of your finger not touching on a fret, then you can lift up all the way and there's no more noise, or there's very minimal noise to be made. If you were to just like touch the string on your ukulele and lift off, it's very quiet compared to if you were playing a note and you lift off from there. Versus, right? It's kind of a subtle difference, but if you put that hitch in your finger, that can really help as you're changing strings. Not so much when you're changing notes, because if you're on the same string and you're changing notes, usually you're just going from one to the other, unless you're playing in a staccato style. But what you can also do instead of, or in conjunction with the hitch in your left fretting hand, what you can also do is think about dampening with your right hand as you move. So like my line that I was thinking about was like kind of a weird minor thing. So that's just on the C string, 5th fret, 4th fret, and then E string, 7, 5, and then A string, 7, 5. Kind of like a Santana thing. And if you're careful when you move strings, you like do the hitch thing, you're going to not have a lot of sound carrying across. But if you don't, and you just, and And I'm trying to undo all my practice of trying to play quietly when I'm trying to demonstrate that. But that's a lot of times what people will hear is you kind of have that open string pull off chatter in the background. And what you can do is when, as you're done playing on a string, this hand can come in and grab that string. So and this is really hard to break down. There's a lot happening here. It's very much something that you have to, and especially with the lift mute thing too, or the hitch on the finger. You can't think fast enough to apply that to each note that it needs to be applied to. It's one of those things you just need to practice intentionally and very slowly at first. And as you do it enough times and you start playing pieces very slowly, then you can start thinking about, you know, putting it on autopilot and not having to directly think about it. But if you try and, brain power it out, you just don't have the brain power to think about what you're playing and also think about, oh, hitch before I move strings. It's just one of those things that you'll start doing naturally if you practice it enough. Same thing with dampening on the right hand. So let's say I was picking with my index finger. This is not necessarily how I would play this, not necessarily the most efficient way to play this, but it's gonna, if we choose one finger, it'll give me a little bit of a jumping off point in which to demonstrate this. Okay, so I'm gonna play the whole thing. I just did it wrong there, but I'm gonna play the whole thing with my index finger. Okay, and what I mean by the dampening is watch what my thumb does as I'm playing in this style. My thumb moves down the strings to touch the one I was just playing. And I do it a lot better when I don't think about it. As soon as I start to like intentionally think about it, I start to mess up. But if I just play it, my thumb is moving down to keep those strings quiet. And if you watch, something else you can do is as you play further down the strings, your thumb can lean up a little bit so that the side of your thumb, instead of just touching one string with your thumb, as you move downwards, you can continue to touch the strings that you've already played to ensure that they're going to stay quiet as you move. Right? So you can try that. Just pick this little thing we're trying here with your index finger, just upwards with your index finger. And just play it like just boring classical style if you need to get started. And then try and bring your thumb onto the unused strings. So for instance, while I'm playing on the C string, my thumb is actually resting on the G string. So the G string is not going to make any noises. And probably, without even thinking about it, I'm going to be resting my unused fingers here. So my middle and ring fingers are going to be on the E and the A strings to keep them from making noise. So I'm playing piano style here. My fingers are prepped as if I was playing piano style where I would just grab all the strings at once. But instead of doing that, I'm plucking with my index finger and the other three are dampening the strings so they're not going to make noise. And when I make the switch, I'm probably going, this is so detail oriented. This is really for the more advanced players. But when I make the switch down to the next strings, I'm actually going to take my middle finger off of the E string because I'm not dampening there anymore. Remember, I'm gonna play it with my index finger now. My thumb moves down, and my ring finger stays on the A string. And then when I do the last switch, I need to get my ring finger out of the way. So I'm going to lift that up, and now I can pick the bottom string, and my thumb is kind of at a sideways angle to keep the rest of the strings from making noise. And it's sort of, you go in reverse when you go backwards. Okay, let's see if I can do it really slow. And it's hard once you start to really think about it, but you're not just going to get this. It's just not going to happen. But it's one of those detail things that if you're a more advanced player, if you're playing some lead stuff and you want to kind of tighten it up and clean it up, this is a really interesting way to allow you to do that, is getting some dampening going. And you don't have to play with your index finger to use dampening. If you're playing with your thumb, um, you can move all over the place and use different fingers and have different dampening styles. So let me think. If I was to just play that whole thing with my thumb, by nature of how it works, when the thumb picks downwards, it's kind of landing on the string below. That's usually a good picking technique, is you either want to land on the string below where you're plucking or the string above where you're plucking. If you're plucking with your index finger, it's kind of like the rest stroke thing. So I'm going to come to rest on the string above where I'm playing through. And that, in effect, kind of creates a bit of dampening from the picking finger hitting that string. So my finger is basically dampening that string that I'm going to. But if I was to play this with my thumb and kind of do it's kind of a rest stroke, but it's more like just a normal thumb pick style where you come through the string and rest on the one below it. That's becoming kind of my dampening with my thumb. Right? And when you're playing with your thumb, there's not a whole lot you can do about the lower strings ringing, which is why if you really want to keep it quiet, it's probably going to serve you well to switch to your index finger as you go to the higher strings. Because if I'm playing with my thumb, unless I'm going to try and do this, but then my picking range is really limited with my thumb. There's just not a lot I can do about that unless I'm using my left hand. If I was to mute with my thumb, that would be another approach. But again, that's not as easy to do or as elegant. You have to kind of make that happen. Whereas if you're using your right hand and you were to go from thumb to plucking rest strokes with your fingers, it's a little bit more natural to use your right hand. It can adapt to that style a little bit better than the left hand can. So any questions about any of that? This is like super detail oriented, but I'm kind of honestly running out of ideas for what to teach in these lessons because we've talked about a lot of really good stuff and interesting stuff. And I just, there's a lot of people already teaching like songs and stuff. So I don't feel like my time as a teacher is as useful as it could be if I'm teaching precise songs. I like to teach concepts and ideas and inspiring things and hopefully get people thinking about how they can play differently. So I feel like this is sort of one of those moments. It's how to keep things quiet. You don't really think about it, but if you want to take your playing up to the next level, a little bit of dampening and muting can really tighten things up and clean it up. So if you have any questions, throw them up in the chat. Also, if you have any requests for next week, I think this is lesson number 18, I believe. I believe I'm going to go up to number 20 and then take a break. I need to percolate on some new ideas, come up with some things that would be helpful in more videos, and get my Tuesdays back for a while. But we'll be here for 2 more lessons, so you can come soak up as much as you can, and then practice all the stuff I've talked about for as long as it takes. Right? If you're not already, I would encourage and request you folks, let's see, my mic's in the way of my keyboard, to please sign up for my newsletter. I'm going to be launching my new course this weekend. The formatting on this page is kind of messed up, but that's the idea. If you go to that link there in the chat, liveukulele.com/sign up. You can sign up for my newsletter. Usually I send out tips and updates um, for kind of the projects I've been working on, new material that you might be interested in. But especially this weekend, I'm going to be talking about the new course that I'm releasing about how to play double stop sixth harmonies. My first video course, my first real course. I feel like I'm growing up and getting into the arena with all the big boys, and hopefully providing some super useful, awesome content for you folks to work on and practice. There's going to be a couple of practical song applications and tabs and PDF downloads and lots of information about how to play these things, along with 2 cameras, not just this webcam in my bedroom kind of thing. It's full on filmed, and there's a close up hand shot, and then there's the arms waving shot as I explain things. So if that sounds interesting, please join in to the newsletter via the link in the chat. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Hope that was helpful. As always, you can reach out to me on the Discord or via email or via YouTube comments. I usually see those for the most part. Throw your questions up there. And yeah, I'll see you all next week. Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you have any ideas for concepts or subjects I should teach in the next couple lessons, please let me know. I usually wake up Tuesday morning and lie in bed and think about what I'm going to try and teach, try and come up with an idea. So if we have something planned, that would be cool too. Sweet. Have a good day in your little part of the world, and I'll see y'all down the road. Aloha.